We have a lot to cover in today's lesson. This will be our first truly hands-on project where we will build a simple tool from the front to back. So our goal in this lesson is, without using a database, which we haven't reviewed yet, that'll be reviewed in the following week's worth of lessons. For now, how could we use a file-based system to create a mailing list registration system? So ideally, the goal is give the user the ability to give you their name and email address and sign up for a mailing list. What we will do in this case is take those credentials and store them within a file and give ourselves an easy way to view all of that information and add to it. And then at that point in the future, you could maybe write a specific function that would send an email to that entire list of folks who signed up. All right, we have a lot to cover. Let's get started. I have this new folder, Simple Email Registration, and I'm going to create my first template file. So I will call it index.tmpl.php. And we will also create our quote-unquote controller. And to get started, I'm going to require index.template.php. So now within our view, we're going to call this our view. I'm going to bring in some HTML here, set up a doc type. And the first thing I want to do is set up a little form, join the mailing list, like so. All right, so now within here, we need to have a form. And the action, we'll just post to the current page for now. And the method will be post. So the first thing that I should do is set up an unordered list. And within here, as we've been doing before, I'm going to set up a form element. And this will be for the name, and we'll do your name. That looks good. Now I also need to get their email address. So I will do this one as well, your email address. And finally, we need to have a section for them to submit the form, of course. So I will get rid of the label and change the type to submit. We'll get rid of this and give it a value of sign up. All right, let's view this in the browser. Here we are, and now we have our little form. Let's just do a very quick bit of styling. As always, we can get rid of type equals text / CSS. And within here, I'm going to style the list items and do list style is none. Okay, and that's fine for now. So we have this section, join the mailing list. They're going to give their name and email address. And when they sign up, we're going to post to the current page. So that's the next step. Go back to index.php. And at the top, we're going to detect whether or not the form has been posted. And as we learned in one of the previous lessons, we can do that by determining whether the request method equals post. Was the form posted? In that case, we want to grab the name and the email. And we've learned we can do that by using post name, and for the other one, post email. Now for now, I just want to echo name and die when the form posts. So if I type my name, yeah, we're going to get that. But also, what if I do a bunch of spaces here, something like that? Now if I click sign up and I view the source, I do want you to note that those spaces are included. So I would like to have some way to trim off any extra spaces that the user may have accidentally added. And we can do that in PHP by using the trim function, like so. Bring those in. Now if I reload the page, you'll notice that it trims off any extra spaces, and that's very helpful. Now the next step is, we've gotten those values, now I need to determine, did they fill everything out? And let's just kind of do a makeshift way for now. We're going to say if empty name, or meaning if the post name item is an empty string, or if they didn't fill anything out, then we need to require them to enter that name. So we'll do if empty name or empty email. In that case, we need to, for now, I'm going to set a variable called status, and then we'll change this shortly. So the status will be, please provide a name and valid email address. Notice that I did say valid. We'll come back to that shortly. Right now, we're just making sure that those fields are not blank. So we've set this variable status. The next step is to come back to our view, and within the form, I can say within PHP, if is set status, then echo status. Something like that will do for now. So let's reload the page. I'm going to sign up without filling anything. And now the page reloads and says, please provide a name and valid email address. Next, let me come back, and rather than just echoing out status, why don't we do this? If is set, we will do the shorthand syntax, and then I will create a paragraph with a class of error, or let's change it to notice. we're going to give them a notification. And that's going to be PHP echo status, like so. The next step is to create a style rule for that. So maybe notice, maybe a color of red and font style of italic, something like that. All right, now sign up and we get this notification. Good. However, if I do fill out some information here, notice I'm not even going to put in a valid email address. I click sign up. Now the form posts, and this time if we come back, this test fails, so nothing happens. Well, let's fix that. Now we're going to do an else statement, and this is where we are going to add the information to a file. And now an excellent way to deal with abstractions like this is to describe what you need to do. So if you think about it from top to bottom, we're saying when the page loads, if the form has been posted, then grab the name and email address. And if they're not empty, then what do we want to do? Well, in that case, we want to add the registered user. So rather than writing all the code here, let's think about it in terms of abstractions. Add registered user. Well, let's create this function, and that way it'll be a lot more readable. We're going to add a registered username and send through their name and email address. Now at this point, we have not created the functions file. So I'm going to do that right now, functions.php. And then at the top, I'm going to require functions.php so that within this file, we have access to everything that we would need from the functions.php file. All right, so now we need to create the add registered users function. Function add registered user. We know that that accepts a name and email address. And now we can use one of the functions that we learned earlier, file put contents. So what is the name of this file going to be? I'm going to call it mailinglist.php. But there's something I'm doing here that I want you to be very careful about. If we write the user's name and email address to this file, meaning that ultimately this file will contain a massive list of names and email addresses, you have to be certain that the public does not have access to that file. And there's lots of different ways to do it. One way would be to, for example, within this file, determine whether a constant is available. And if it's not, then you need to restrict access. That way, within one of these files, we can include the mailing list file and set the constant. That way, if they try to access that page directly, they don't have access to it. Or a better way would be to store mailinglist.php outside of your document root. And that way, people browsing the web have no chance to gain access to that file. So what we will do ultimately is store this one level up from our document root. But for now, I'm going to keep it like this just so it's easier to quickly go between files within Sublime. I'm going to make a note of that here because this is really important, secure file. Good, so now we've file put contents. What are we going to add to this file? Well, let's add this string here. We're going to begin with a new line, and we're going to have the user's name, followed by a colon, and then their email address. Now, the way file put contents will work by default is it will create the file if it does not already exist. And then it will overwrite everything within the file with whatever you pass. So let's try this out. Reload the page, and I'll set my name, Jeffrey Way, and Jeffrey@Envato.com. And if I click submit, that will have submitted. We haven't provided any feedback yet, but now you'll see that there's this new mailinglist.php file. And if I open it up, now you can see that we've added a new line and the user's name. But now watch what happens if I do this one more time, and we say John Doe, John@Doe.com. And if I click sign up again, yes, we are writing to that file, but file put contents by default will just overwrite that file. So we need to fix that. The first thing I want to fix is I don't want this new line at the beginning. Let's instead place that at the end of the string, like so. Next, I will pass an optional third parameter to file put contents, and this can specify how it should behave. So when I write file_append, that means that rather than overwriting the file entirely, we're going to append this text to whatever is already stored within the file. So now let's do it one more time. Jane Doe, Jane@Doe.com, reload it. And now notice that we have added another line there. Let's try it one more time just to be certain. Jeffrey@Envato, sign up. Yeah, there we go. And now we're adding these items to this text file. And remember, I need to drill this into your head. You need to protect this file so that it can't be accessed by the public. Because right now, all I need to do is go to mailinglist.php, and we have access to this list of names and email addresses. So we need to take that file when we're done and place it outside of our document root so that this file can never be accessed. The next step is, once we've added that information, we need to provide some level of feedback to the user. So again, while we are sticking with this status variable idea, I'm going to set it to "Thank you for registering. Your information has been added to our mailing list." There we go, that looks good. Now, if I come back to index.template, once the form is posted, this check will run right here, and we will echo out the status. Let's try it again. Once again, John Doe at Lynda.com, sign up, and now we have this information. But if they try to sign up and they don't fill out everything, sign up, now they get this error. So things are starting to work how we would hope. The next step is I'm going to zero out any margins while I'm thinking about it. So we'll do UL and LI, margin 0, padding 0. There we go, that's better. So the next thing I want to do is provide some level for this state to persist. And what I mean by that is, if I enter my name, but I forget the email address and I click sign up, my name has now disappeared entirely. Because remember, the web is stateless. We have to have some kind of functionality to add that information back to the text box when the page reloads. So why don't we write a little function that will do that for us? But before we write that function, I want to show you why we're going to write that function. So here's how we would do it directly within our view. Let's say right here, here's our input. We're going to give it a value, and we need to specify that the value should be equal to the value that existed when the form was posted, if any. So one way we could do that is open up PHP, and I could say echo, and our test will be isSetPostName. If that's the case, then we're going to echo post name. Otherwise, we'll echo nothing at all, like that. So let's leave that alone and try it out. I'm going to reload the page. I will enter some gibberish, click sign up, and yes, that has been preserved. However, that's a lot of muddy code, and this is something that you'll see a lot in some PHP projects. So what you can imagine is this would then be repeated for every section. So we would have another one for email, like that. Then we can set that, sign up, and yes, that's preserved, but now look how ugly our form has become. Not to mention that, as I noted before, your view, the view file, should really be dumb. It shouldn't be doing all of this logic. We should do it for them. So here's a better idea. I'm going to back up just a few steps, get rid of all of this entirely, and instead I simply want to call a function. So I'm going to PHP echo, and our function is going to be called old, and I'm going to pass in the name of the input, like this. And that's a little bit cleaner, but we can even make this more clean if you can depend on using shortcodes, or you're using PHP 5.4. Now, it's important for me to note that this has been available for a long time, but it's widely been considered a bad practice because you can never be certain whether or not the server has this ability turned on. However, as I've noted in previous lessons, with PHP 5.4, it is always turned on, so that's not something you need to worry about. And luckily, when we do it like this, it makes it a lot cleaner. Echo, then we call the old function and pass in the name of the input. Name. Now I can simply copy this, add it to the next one as well, and at least in my opinion, that's a lot cleaner. And now the view isn't having to perform any logic of its own, it's simply calling a function. Now we need to create that function. So we'll do it right here, function old, and that needs to accept the key. So within here, we'll just run our test again. If not empty, and rather than doing post or get, because we can't be certain which one it will be, we're going to use request, which means any of those. And this is something we haven't covered. As a rule of thumb, always use $post or $get. Be very explicit. In this case, though, I think it's okay. And that way it will work whether the form was posted with the post method or with the get method. Now, rather than trying to get name, we'll take the key that they provided. So as long as that's not empty, we're going to return request key. And just to be safe, I'm going to run that through HTML special chars. just to be absolutely certain that nothing breaks. And it shouldn't by default, but this doesn't hurt either. Lastly, I'm going to return an empty string. I don't really have to do this, but it's helpful for my mind. That way I know, okay, as long as this isn't empty, we're going to return the value that was posted. Otherwise, we're not going to return anything. So sometimes you can add code specifically to help your brain process what's happening here 6 months down the line. All right, let's see if it worked. I'm going to come back, enter some gibberish. There we go, now that's working. Enter an email. Yeah, that's working great, good. The next thing I want to do is make sure that the valid part is true, because right now they can enter a name and they can just enter gibberish for the email address, and that is going to work. If I go back to the mailing list, yep, now we have a name and invalid email address within here, and that's not good. So let's fix that. Let's create a function called valid email. So this function should accept an address, and it needs to return whether or not the string provided is a valid email address. So there's a couple ways to do this. We could, and let me fix this function, we could do something like preg match, which allows us to pass a regular expression and determine whether the string matches that expression. So you would do something like this, preg match, pass in your regular expression, which would be really long here, and then you would pass the email. That would be one way to do it, and plenty of people do. Another way would be to take advantage of PHP's validation filters, and this is something we're going to take a look at in the next lesson. For now, just go with me when I run filter var. We're going to pass in the email, and then our validation. So the validation I want is filter validate email, and that should do a fairly good job of validating whether it's an email address. So this function will return true or false. If we pass in gibberish, that will return false, meaning the valid email function returns false. But if they pass a valid email address, this function will return true. Now I can come back to index.php and add here if name or email is empty or not valid email, then we should set this status variable and load the view. Now I will insert gibberish for both, click sign up, but now it's not working because the valid email option is failing. Jeffrey@Envato.com, sign up, and now it's working and that information has been added. Once again, I want you to remember that the function names we are choosing are very expressive, which makes for a more readable project. If the name or email is empty, or if the email string is not a valid email, then do this. And this is one great thing about functions. They allow for reusable code, but they also give you these abstractions so that you can replace a confusing clump of code with a single function name that perfectly describes what that function does.